Have you ever looked at a flower and, really thought about the incredible drama that's unfolding inside? Seriously, we're not just talking about biology class here. We're talking about a high-stakes journey, a quest full of gatekeepers, secret chemical signals, and a frantic race against time. So let's dive into the secret life of flowers.
I mean, this is the big problem, right? This is the fundamental challenge every single flowering plant on Earth has to solve. They are literally rooted to the spot. So how in the world do they get their genes out there to the next generation? Well, this is what we call the pollination predicament, and plants have come up with some truly mind-blowing solutions. So we're going to follow our tiny hero, a single grain of pollen, on its epic quest. We'll track it through 5 key stages. First, the basic challenge of finding a mate. Then it has to pass a series of tough tests. After that, it's a dangerous journey to the ovule, followed by the grand finale, fertilization. And finally, we'll see how it secures its legacy. Okay, let's start with that core challenge. A plant is sessile. That's just a fancy word for it can't move. To reproduce, it's got to find a way to get its male gametes, which are packed inside pollen, all the way to the female parts of another flower, which could be miles away. The solution? Pollination.
So at its heart, pollination is actually pretty simple. It's just the physical act of moving pollen from point A, the anther, to point B, the stigma. That's it. It's the essential first step that makes everything else happen. But how a plant pulls this off? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Right away, this leads to a huge strategic choice. A plant can play it safe and pollinate itself. It's super reliable, but it also leads to a serious lack of genetic diversity. It's a bit like a family that never leaves its hometown. Or it can take a risk and go for cross-pollination. This creates much healthier, more resilient offspring, but it means you're totally dependent on an outside matchmaker, like a bee or the wind or a hummingbird. Now, to get all those amazing benefits of cross-pollination, a lot of plants have evolved this incredibly sophisticated security system. And it's not about failure. Think of it more like a quality control mechanism. It's called self-incompatibility, and it's basically a bouncer at the door, making sure the plant doesn't accidentally pollinate itself. So what is self-incompatibility, or SI for short? In a nutshell, it's a genetic lock that stops a plant's own pollen from fertilizing its ovules. This ancient system is a huge deal. It's actually considered one of the major reasons flowering plants have become so incredibly successful and diverse all over the globe. And this is a fantastic illustration of one of the simplest forms of SI. You've got 2 different flower shapes here. You have pin flowers with long styles and low anthers, and thrum flowers with short styles and high anthers. So a bee visiting a thrum flower gets pollen all over its head, which is the perfect height to then pollinate a pin flower. It's an elegant, purely physical barrier that makes self-pollination almost impossible. But it gets way more complex on a genetic level. Think of it like a security check. In the first system, gametophytic SI, the pollen grain basically shows its own ID. If its genetic ID, what we call an S allele, matches the flower's ID, it gets rejected. But in the second, much stricter system, sporophytic SI, the flower checks the ID of the parent plant that made the pollen. And if that parent is a genetic match, then absolutely none of its pollen gets in. Game over. Okay, let's see how this actually works. Look at the left at the gametophytic system. The pollen parent has genes S1 and S2. It tries to pollinate a flower that's S2 and S3. Well, the S1 pollen is a non-match, so it gets a green light, it's good to go, but the S2 pollen is a match, so it gets blocked. Only half the pollen can get through. Now look at the stricter sporophytic system on the right. The flower checks the parent, which is S1, S2, and it sees they share that S2 gene. The result? A total lockdown. All the pollen is rejected. So how does this rejection actually happen at a microscopic level? Well, it's a molecular lock-in key. The pollen has a protein that's like a key, and the stigma has a receptor that's the lock. If the key fits the lock, which means they're genetically too similar, it basically sounds an alarm. This triggers a defense response inside that stigma cell that actively stops the pollen from growing. The intruder is neutralized before it even gets started. Okay, our pollen grain has passed the first test. It's been recognized as a worthy partner. So now the real race begins, an epic journey down through the female tissues to reach the ovule. But before the pollen can do anything, it needs a drink of water. The thing is, the stigma tries to keep itself dry to fight off fungus and bacteria. So when a compatible pollen grain lands, proteins in its coat act like a secret password.
They shut down the stigma's keep-dry defense, which finally allows the pollen to absorb water and start to germinate. And this whole initial phase is just a rapid-fire sequence of events. The pollen sticks, it hydrates, and then a tiny tube just bursts out. This tube has to secrete enzymes to literally dissolve the tough outer layer of the stigma and burrow its way into the style. From there, it kicks into high gear, starting an incredibly fast process of tip growth, tunneling its way down, down, down toward the ovary. But how does it know where to go? It's not just growing randomly. The ovule, way down at the destination, is sending out a trail of chemical breadcrumbs, these little proteins called lures. They act just like a molecular GPS signal. The tip of the pollen tube has receptors that can sense this chemical trail, allowing it to navigate with pinpoint precision directly to the unfertilized ovule. It's amazing. And there it is. The pollen tube has arrived at its destination. The journey is almost over, but the most crucial and frankly the most bizarre and unique event is about to happen, a process that is the absolute hallmark of every flowering plant on Earth. And this isn't just another biological process. It is a key evolutionary innovation. This one feature, double fertilization, is what sets flowering plants apart, and it's a huge reason why they absolutely dominate the planet today. Right on cue, responding to signals from the ovule, the pollen tube tip bursts open. It ruptures, releasing its precious cargo right where it needs to be. And that cargo, it isn't one sperm cell, it's two. And this, right here, is where the double in double fertilization comes in. Each of these two sperm cells has a very specific mission. The first one fuses with the egg cell. That creates a diploid zygote, which just means it has two sets of chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad. This will grow into the embryo. But the second sperm cell fuses with the central cell, creating something called a triploid endosperm, which has three sets of chromosomes. This endosperm's only job is to become a nutrient-packed lunch for the embryo. It's so efficient. The plant only invests energy in making baby food after it gets confirmation of a successful fertilization.
And with that, fertilization is complete. The pollen grain's quest is over. But its success kicks off the final act, the incredible transformation of the flower into a fruit, all to ensure the survival of the next generation.
See, fertilization isn't the end of the story. It's the starting gun for a whole new developmental program. That successful fusion of gametes triggers a flood of hormones, mainly one called auxin, which sends a crystal-clear signal to the surrounding ovary. Okay, guys, it's go time. And that hormonal command is what transforms the flower into a fruit. And that fruit has a hugely important job. First, it acts like a protective carrying case for those precious seeds developing inside. But maybe more importantly, it becomes an irresistible package, a fleshy, sweet, colorful reward designed to attract animals who will eat the fruit and, well, carry the seeds far away, helping the species spread to new territory. So, the next time you see a bee buzzing around a flower, or you bite into an apple, just take a second to remember the unbelievable microscopic drama that had to play out perfectly for that to even exist. A high-stakes journey of selection, navigation, and fertilization, all orchestrated by a single tiny grain of pollen. Kind of changes how you see the garden, doesn't it?